Hello and welcome into the Est. I'm your host for this Cubs episode, Ryan Herrera, coming to you Thursday, August 7th. You may be listening to this on a Friday, August 8th, but recording this on the Cubs off day. They just avoided a sweep at the hands of the Reds at home with a win Wednesday to finish off a 500 3-3 quick homestand or regular homestand, but 3-3 homestand. Um, and I kind of want to run down where the Cubs are at right now. I know it's the one thing with baseball is there's so many games and so many chances to kind of turn things around. We're sitting here, the Cubs still have, I want to say, 48 games left to play on the season. They're 66 and 48, one of the best teams still technically record wise in baseball, third actually in baseball as far as records go. And but as we sit here, the Cubs are 66 and 48, I believe, right? Yeah, 66 and 48. And they find themselves shockingly, I guess not shockingly if you've been following the standings for the last few weeks, month and a half, 2 months, whatever it's been. But they're now 4 games back in the division to the Milwaukee Brewers, who sit at 70 and 44 with the best record in Major League Baseball. And yes, it's a shock. I mean, the Cubs still have a plus 115 run differential, which is second only to the Brewers right now in baseball. Like there's still, when you look at the overall body of work, still have been one of the best teams in baseball. And even, there's obviously we'll get to the Brewers, but when you look at teams like the Dodgers and the Mets and some other teams that are up there with as far as best records in baseball go, like other teams have scuffled that shouldn't necessarily be scuffling, or you would expect to be the those best teams in baseball, right? Like there are other teams that haven't also played their best brands of baseball over the past few weeks, but obviously we focus on the Cubs, and I think especially when you look at since the All-Star break, haven't exactly been playing their best brand of baseball overall. But so I want to run down just kind of what the last month and a half or so has looked. On June 17th, the Cubs beat the Brewers at home. They had a 6.5 game lead in the division, which also lasted through that rain out the next day. That was their largest lead in the division of the season. They were 45 and 28 at that point. A couple weeks later, July 6th, they beat the Cardinals. The Cubs still had a 4 game lead in the division. They were still 18 games, actually had improved on that June 17th record. They were 18 games above 500 at 54 and 36. However, they have gone 12 and 12 since, which, a 500 record over a month isn't the end of the world, of course. Like if 500 is your worst month stretch or so, that's, yeah, not the end of the world. But they have gone 12 and 12 since, so they still remain 18 games above 500. There was a point after taking on the first 2 games of that Boston series. So July 19th, they were actually 20 games above 500. So they kind of remained in the same place record wise, but they are now 4 games back. Why has that happened? Well, because the Milwaukee Brewers just can't seem to lose a game or even just any games in a row at this point. Like it's been going on for a while, but the Milwaukee Brewers have been one of the best. The Milwaukee Brewers are the best team in baseball record wise, and they have played like the best team in baseball over the last couple months now. It's not necessarily a fluke anymore or a result of record, because they have beaten some really good teams. I mean, I think they swept the season series against the Dodgers, one in Milwaukee and one in LA. So Milwaukee's hot, and they've been hot for a while. Milwaukee's kind of tail of the tape here is they were 3 games below 500 on May 24th at 25 and 28. They were 4 games back of the Cubs. Then they rattled off 8 straight W's. Again, as I mentioned, 6.5 games back on June 18th. That was that rainout game, but they were 39 and 35, so they'd gotten back to 4 games above 500. And then after that, they won 8 of their next 9 games. That same day, the Cubs beat the Cardinals, July 6th. The Brewers were still 4 games back, but they had improved even more to 50 and 40. And that game, they won that day on July 6th, and that was the first of their 11 straight wins, an 11-game win streak that they put together. They did at the last weekend of July. They lost the first 2 games in a series in Milwaukee to the Marlins. I was actually there covering the Marlins that weekend, so it was interesting to watch a surging Marlins team, of course, as well. I think that if anyone that hasn't paid attention to them, they've surged over the last month and a half or so to even get to a point where they weren't full on sellers at the trade deadline. But so the Brewers lost the first two games of that series to Miami, and the division between the Cubs and Brewers was a tie atop the division. But the Brewers have since won 9 of their last 10, including a current streak of 6 straight wins going into today. I think the Brewers are off today, so going into Friday, they will still be on a current streak of 6 straight wins. You look back at that May 24th, that day of May 24th. I mentioned it earlier. The Brewers were 3 games below 500. They were, what was it, 4 games back at that point. Still, the Cubs hadn't quite built a major lead in the division. But since that day, May 24th, the Brewers have gone 45-16. They went from 25-28 to now 70-44, which is kind of an unbelievable stretch. I feel like it's kind of been said that, like, oh, it's not sustainable, like that winning percentage. I want to say it's like a 713 or something like that. Winning percentage, like, feels unsustainable, but they've sustained it for 2 months of the season now. Over 2 months of that, over a 2 month stretch of the season. It's a 61 game sample, right? That's more than a third of the year. So they've figured out a way to sustain it for a while now. I mean, it's kind of funny when I remember reading a piece over at MLB.com. Brewers writer Adam McCalvey wrote kind of about, like, people like writers covering other teams when they're facing the Brewers, and national media and stuff like that just kind of will come into games games the Brewers are playing and kind of ask, how are they doing this? The Brewers are winning with excellent pitching, including in the rotation, but also in the bullpen. Their base running is great. They don't hit a lot of home runs, but they get on base a lot. Their infield hits. They get a ton of infield hits. They're moving runners over, doing a lot of the little things right, all that jazz, and they're doing it at a really high level and doing it consistently. And obviously, that's leading to wins consistently. The Brewers' rotation since May 24th has the lowest ERA in baseball, while their bullpen has the 6th lowest, and their offense has the number 2 WRC plus and the number 2, and their second is in terms of Fangraphs wins above replacement. That's entering today. Some teams were playing today. Not many teams played today. A lot of teams had off days, but those stats are just updated through or entering today, Thursday, August 7th. In that same time span, the Cubs are actually 8 games above 500, since May 24th, actually 8 games above 500 in that stretch. The rotation has the number 7 ERA, so the rotation has still been a top 10 in terms of ERA. The bullpen's just outside the top 10 with the 11th lowest ERA. The Cubs position player group, the lineup, they're tied for the 5th highest WRC plus and actually have the 3rd most wins above replacement, according to Fangraphs, 3rd highest F4. So they've actually been still one of the better teams in that, while the Brewers have gone on this insane 45-16 or whatever I said it was stretch, 45-16. In that same time span, the Cubs have still been one of the better teams as far as some of those metrics go in baseball. So it's been a lot more of a recent slumping on the team, along with the Brewers continuing to stay hot. That's taken the Cubs from a solid enough lead in the division, feels pretty quickly into 4 games back now. The Cubs lost on July 20th. That was the last game of that Red Sox series. It was the first time they didn't hold sole possession of first place in the division since April 11th. And they've not held sole possession of the division since. And since July 20th, the lineup, the position player group, the Cubs position player group is 17th in terms of F4 in baseball, and they're tied for 17th in WRC plus. So middling to a little bit below the midway point of the league of baseball in terms of F4 and WRC plus as far as the lineup goes. The rotation does own the number 6 ERA in that stretch, but the bullpen is down to the number 28 ERA. So it's been I mean, that's July 20th is only a couple weeks ago, going in on 3 weeks now. So about 2.5 weeks of baseball. So it's basically been since the All-Star break at that point, where the offense just hasn't been as good overall as they were for the first couple months or so of the season. The rotation has stepped up and done some good things, but the bullpen has obviously had, I mean, you saw it with like Chris Flexen and Ryan Presley, like they ended up getting DFA'd, where like Ryan Presley had a really long stretch of good outings, even if they weren't the most high leverage innings of a game. Had a really long stretch of good outings. Chris Flexen looked really good. Both those guys started to decline and ended up being DFA'd. I think Brad Keller's given up a few more runs lately. Drew Pomeranz went from, he wasn't gonna never give up a run, but I think he's given up a few more runs lately. Like there's just overall the bullpen that seemed to be firing on all cylinders, and a lot of those arms that you kind of were surprised at how well they were doing regressed more to the mean a little bit. And that was kind of to be expected, especially over the course of a baseball season. But that's kind of where you see that ERA number being so low compared to the rest of the league, the rest of the bullpens around baseball. So that's obviously, again, since July 20th. The Cubs haven't held sole possession of first place since that day, or since the day before that, July 19th. While the Brewers just continue to remain hot, continue to win games, continue to win series, and just beat opponents left and right. So that's kind of the state of where the Cubs are at compared to the NL Central. But obviously, there's still plenty of baseball left to play. As I said earlier, 48 games left in the season for them. But the Cubs obviously have ground to make up. I also said earlier they do still have the second best record in the National League, third best record in Major League Baseball. They do have a few games to make up, or there are a few games up in the wild card race as well. So they have a solid enough lead there. But the goal is to win the division. The goal is to win the division and earn one of those top 2 seeds and get the bye in the first round of the playoffs, right? Like that's the goal. That should be the goal right now, and the Cubs should not take their sights off that. The one thing you hear players and Craig Counsell talk about is not being worried about what the Brewers are doing. Like you're obviously aware of it. You can see the scores, you can see the scoreboard and the standings and all that stuff. They're aware of it, of course, but you can't, if you're the Cubs, concern yourself with what the Brewers are doing day in and day out. I think Craig Counsell has pointed to the 5-game set versus the Brewers at Wrigley, 5 games in 4 days from August 18th through the 21st, which is going to be crucial. But, Counsell and players themselves have pointed to that as like, that's where we can control things when it comes to the Brewers. We can't control things when they're playing other teams and we're not playing them. Like, all you can do at that point is go out and take care of your own business, and obviously hope that the opponents facing the Brewers can go out and give you some help. But you can't just worry about what the Brewers are doing day in and day out. In that 5-game set, you obviously control what happens to the Brewers because you're playing them. And that's what the Cubs, coaches, players, again, they've pointed to that as like, this is when we're talking about controlling things we can control, that series is something we can control. That's something that the Cubs players and coaches can go in and control what happens to the Brewers because they're opposite them on the field. So that has obviously turned into a massively crucial series, but it is only 5 games out of the 48 they have left. So at that point, like you need to do a good job of winning those games. Of course, I think the season series is tied right now. So the Cubs, I think the season series is tied right now. So whoever wins that series will get the tiebreaker at the end of the year. So of course, again, like I said, super crucial. But outside of that, I think the Cubs just have to hope the Brewers slow down, even though this is more than just a hot streak at this point. Hope the Brewers can slow down and take care. And if they do, Well, even if they don't, but just continue to take care of the business that's in front of you and get to that series against the Brewers. That's all the Cubs can do at this point because they don't control their own destiny, right? Like they obviously are going to need help from the teams the Brewers are playing, but they have to focus on what they're doing day to day, not focus on what the Brewers are doing. And then when it comes time to play the Brewers at Wrigley, 5 games, 4 days, take care of business. That's all you can do. But yeah, I mean, it's shaping up to be an exciting last month and a half or so of baseball, especially when it comes to coming out of that series and seeing where those two teams are at coming out of it. But we're getting right at the stretch run we're here right now as the Cubs keep continuing to make this playoff push. I said it; they're in a good spot when it comes to the wild card, but wild card shouldn't be the goal. Wild card should be the it should feel like a consolation prize if you get there because now you've played yourself into a position where the winning the division is super realistic still. 4 games is not a ton of ground to make up. You saw how quickly the Brewers switched the script on the Cubs over the last few weeks. So you're only 4 games back, and you got to take care of your business and just kind of see where the cards fall, see where the chips fall, whatever that now or that metaphor is, right? Like you just got to take care of your own business for the Cubs, and then just see what the other teams do when it comes time for them to play the Brewers. So that's just kind of resetting the National League Central picture. I did mention that the offense over the last few weeks, however long it's been, just obviously hasn't looked as good as it has or as it did in the first couple months of the season when they were beating a lot of really good teams and were arguably the best, or they were one of the best offenses in baseball. They were definitely up there in a lot of different categories. Have not looked as good lately, more recently, especially when like just basically since the All-Star break. And while the struggles seem to be coming from everyone near the top of the order, I think you can point to like say Suzuki wasn't hitting as well, and Michael Bush obviously wasn't hitting as well. I think Pete Armstrong hit a little bit of a rough patch in August, but one of the most prime examples is Kyle Tucker. One of the most prime examples of struggles, especially some extended struggles, has come from Kyle Tucker. So if you think back to that finger injury he suffered on a slide that was on June 1st, I think the Cubs had an off day after that, and then he sat a game, but then was back in the lineup June 4th. So didn't require an IL stint. Didn't need him to be out of the lineup for 10 days, only a couple days, or only maybe even 1.5 games, something like that. But he was back in the lineup. And he actually ended up having a nice month of June, 25 games that month. He played 25 games that month. He ended up hitting 311, 404 on base percentage, 578 slugging. So that was a 982 OPS. He did strike out 20 times compared to 13 walks, but still a really nice month. I think his OPS ending June was actually higher than his OPS was when he suffered that finger injury. So it's not like the finger caused him to have this super down month in June. It was actually a really nice month for him at the plate. But then it was like July 1st when that seems to be when things sort of flipped for him. Since July 1st, so that again, stats through today, August 7th, that comes into play today, of course, and Tucker had that day off Wednesday. So the last 28 games he's played, all coming since July 1st, he's hitting 208, a 353 on base percentage, and a 271 slugging. So, which gets up to a 624 OPS, which honestly, when you're talking about just like, it feels like, if you look at social media, like the sky is falling on Kyle Tucker. Like a 624 OPS isn't good. Like, don't get me wrong and say that that's a good OPS, but like, there are way worse slumps to be in than a 624 OPS. So again, I'm not gonna say that's good. Like it's not a good number, especially when he's arguably your most important hitter in the lineup. But it's far from like the world has ended for Kyle Tucker over the last month and change. Over his last 28 games. However, he does only have the one home run, or one. He's only hit one home run and 3 doubles in that stretch. That's 122 plate appearances. So just not, of course, as you look at that 271 slugging, just not a lot of slug for him, not putting the ball over the fence, not getting balls into the gaps and stuff. Just not a lot of extra base hits for him over his last over 100 plate appearances now. So again, since July 1st, 28 game samples. So that may be part of what we're looking at as far as uh, where a lot of the struggles are coming from. Obviously, the 208 batting average isn't good as well. Like it just overall just needs to hit more. But definitely the slugging has been a concern here for a little bit, for a little while. As I mentioned, he did get the off day on Wednesday, as Craig Counsell, Cubs manager, hoped to give him that day, and then today's off day to reset. There's a quote from Counsell: "Is just to give him a day off to reset. There's a lot of good things happening there. It's just he's missing some pitches that he feels like he should hit. That's hitting sometimes. You miss a pitch you should hit. Pitcher makes a good pitch and you're walking back to the dugout. That's the fine line of hitting in the big leagues. You get pitches to hit, you got to do something with them. Lately, they've been foul balls for him, and that's kind of put him in some tough spots. And that's sort of what we talked to Kyle Tucker at Wrigley Wednesday morning. Just kind of picked his brain about the struggles and what the last month and change has been like for him, and if the finger is affecting him and stuff. He said he feels fine, like the finger feels okay, and he doesn't know. He didn't really say like, or he said he doesn't really know mechanically what could be going wrong, if it's anything mechanically there. But here's a quote from him. Again, I feel like I'm still swinging at pitches I want to and taking ones I don't want to swing at. Pitches over the plate, I just end up fouling off or might swing and miss at times, and then I just end up getting in worse counts, and it kind of just doesn't work out from there. But I still swing at the pitches. I just need to figure out how to put those forward. So he kind of echoed what Craig Counsell said there, as far as like he's swinging at the right pitches, and he feels like he's swinging at the pitches he should be swinging at. He's just fouling them off or might just swing through them, and that's been kind of plaguing him. And I think if you watched Kyle Tucker over the last month or so, like usually there's definitely some instances where you've seen that, where you just feel like maybe the timing's off or maybe something's a little out of whack, because a ball that you would feel like Kyle Tucker at his best would be hammering out of the ballpark, right? A ball over the heart of the plate that he should be hammering out of the ballpark, he might foul it back, or he might hit it into the ground, or whatever it is, or he might even swing through it. I think we've seen a little bit of that for sure over the last month or so, while this slump has kind of extended for over a month now. He does still have 22 walks in that July 1st stretch, does still have 22 walks compared to 19 strikeouts. So he is like, that kind of goes to the point of like he's swinging at the pitches he should be swinging, not chasing, waiting for the pitch, being willing to take the walk, like the good plate discipline skills that we knew Kyle Tucker had coming in. Like he's still showing that this season. One more quote from him, especially when it comes to that walk to strikeout ratio right there. He said, "If I'm just chasing balls in the dirt or above my head the whole time, it's a different story. It's just a matter of making solid contact forward. That's kind of where I'm at. At times, you're going to foul pitches you think you should hit, or you swing through pitches you think you should hit. That's kind of where it's been. I just got to figure out how to put those in play and hit them harder." So I think it's the main thing. It's just there's something out of whack there, where he's not hitting the pitches he should be hitting, and definitely hitting them hard and giving them a ride. Like, he just doesn't feel like he's doing that consistently right now, or definitely not doing that consistently right now. And that's certainly been plaguing him. That's certainly been a big culprit when it comes to the struggles since July 1st. And it was kind of like it's kind of like a, how do you fix it, right? Like, how do you get him back to that space where he's feeling like his best self, like his timing's right, he's not out of whack, that kind of stuff. He's hitting those pitches that he seems to be fouling off or swinging right through at this point. It's not an easy fix. Like, there's no formula or right answer or easy answer on how to fix that. And so I think that's probably part of why Craig Counsell decided him to give the day off. They decided to give him the day off on Wednesday. He's going to get 2 days just to kind of reset, clear his head, and not have to go up, or not have to go and look at swings and watch scout pitchers or look at scouting reports on the opposing pitchers and stuff like that. Just like free to kind of reset, give his body a couple days. We'll see if that helps. We'll see if that kind of helps him turn things around. I think the main thing with him is just it has to happen. I think it's even a little bit more magnified, as I said, because he is arguably the Cubs' most important hitter right now. He probably is the Cubs' most important hitter for this season, but it may be even more magnified because other players around him are struggling themselves in their own ways. I mentioned like Suzuki there and Michael Busch and those kind of guys. Guys that it seems like all their guys that are supposed to be their biggest contributors are the ones that aren't necessarily contributing more recently. And Kyle Tucker's cheap. He's one of those guys. He's one of the guys that the struggles have been, as I said, longer and more pronounced. Maybe would be the right word. So I think if you're the Cubs and if you're Tucker, like you take the couple days, you take the mental reset that Council's given him, and again, there's no easy answer to how to get things back on track, but have to figure out how to do that because the offense needs you. You see how much when Kyle Tucker is at his best and putting up 900 plus OPS, like you see how that impacts the rest of the lineup. You see how Seiya Suzuki was thriving for a long time, hitting right behind Tucker for the most part when Kyle Tucker was at his best. Like it lengthens the lineup. It puts a dangerous bat ahead of guys like Suzuki and Busch and Picor Armstrong and other guys behind them in the lineup. So you just need him to figure out because he's that important. But as I said, and I'm going to keep saying, like, there's no easy answer to that. It's just on Kyle Tucker and maybe, the hitting coaches as well to kind of, if you can identify something, identify it. But just it has to be figured out soon because the Cubs offense needs that boost from Kyle Tucker, a boost they haven't really been getting over the last 4 or so weeks. But that boost that they sorely need and maybe helps get that offense back to the level it was playing at over the first couple months or so of the season. Like they need that, especially if you're talking about running the Brewers down in this NL Central race to the postseason. My last thing here goes to, we already got some bad news on a Cubs trade deadline acquisition. The trade deadline show was a week ago, and already some major bad news here for one of the Cubs trade deadline acquisitions and Michael Soroka. I think the big question is there, like, was this just a big swing and a miss by Jed Hoyer in the front office at the trade deadline? Because Michael Soroka, who the Cubs got from the Nationals in exchange for minor leaguers Ronnie Cruz and Christian Franklin, he made his Cubs debut on Monday. Yeah, on Monday, but only lasted 2 innings and then hit the 15-day injured list on Tuesday with a right shoulder strain. He said he had felt something grab in his right shoulder. I guess he was trying to put something extra on the fastball or something like that. And just felt something grab, hoped it would go away in the next few pitches, and it didn't. And ultimately, the next day, he came out of the game, and then the next day, the Cubs had to put him on the injured list. It's obviously a tough break for Soroka, but of course for the Cubs, just acquired him at the trade deadline. With all the injuries the rotation has already gone through and is still kind of trying to recover from at this point. The idea was to plug him into the rotation, and as other arms got healthy and stuff like that, and that depth started to lengthen back out, they could have used him in a swingman role, and maybe that was a good spot for him if the rest of the rotation was still healthy. Obviously now, you don't know what this is going to look like anymore for Michael Soroka. He's not in the rotation anymore. They can't. That's another arm down that they are in the starting rotation, and it sucks obviously for the Cubs and for Soroka, but it is also something that we talked about when they got him, as far as like there are some red flags here in acquiring Michael Soroka. He did tell reporters Monday that he had undergone an MRI ahead of his final start for the Nationals on July 20th. The Cubs were aware of that, and Soroka told reporters that the results didn't show any red flags. It was kind of to give him a peace of mind. I think a lot of that stemmed from his velocity dipping in July, which it also had remained down Monday prior to him exiting the game. But his velocity had certainly dipped, and I think the MRI part of that was to, like he said, give him that peace of mind there was nothing there causing it. They didn't see anything that raised red flags. Jed Hoyer told reporters that the team was aware of the velocity trending down and talked through that extensively. But given the market for starting pitchers and the asking price, they felt like it was a good bet to make, that they could get Soroka, get him back on track, and have him be a productive member of the rotation, or even, again, as that swing man, maybe a multi-inning reliever kind of guy, but have him be a productive member of this pitching staff down the stretch. He felt that it was a good bet to make. Right now, it's not looking like a good bet. That's the problem, right? It's still to be determined on a return for Michael Soroka. It's to be determined if he will return and pitch for the Cubs at all this season. Craig Counsell told reporters on Tuesday that Soroka would be shut down for 7 to 10 days and then reevaluated. So now you're left wondering, was it the right decision for the Cubs to make? The rotation picture right now is Matthew Boyd, Shota Imanaga, Colin Ray, and Cade Horton, who Cade Horton had another really impressive start Wednesday to kind of lead the Cubs to that victory. It felt like a much needed victory. I think he's at like a 23 and a third inning scoreless streak right now, which he's just been incredible now for the last month. And so he's been massive as far as impacting the rotation, especially as a rookie, especially with all the injuries that the Cubs have faced, especially with him blowing past, his highest innings total as a pro, and especially with him having missed as much time as he did last season due to injury, and even just throughout his baseball life with injury. He's been huge for him. But those are the four guys right now as far as the rotation picture goes. Ben Brown maybe rejoins that, but the Cubs do have today's off day and Monday's off day to kind of play with the rotation and how they want to do things there. They also do have Jameson Taillon and Javier Assad, both on rehab assignments. Jameson Taillon hasn't pitched since the end of June, and Javier Assad hasn't pitched at all this year. The Cubs hope to get both of them back soon, maybe in the next 2 to 3 weeks or so. Remains to be seen exactly how much longer those guys are going to need before they are able to return to the Cubs. But an August return is kind of expected at this point for the both of them, and that will certainly help as far as pitching depth goes, and you'll kind of see what those two are able to add to this rotation now or once they do get healthy. If they do get healthy, obviously, that's knock on wood for that, but that remains to be seen, because as we saw with Javier Assad, setbacks do happen, and you don't want them to happen, but you can't rush through these things until you're 100% ready to be healthy and be ready to go to help this ball club. So we'll see what happens over the next couple weeks or so with those two guys. But back to Soroka, this is another reason why, we all kind of felt the Cubs needed another playoff caliber starter, a guy that you can get and say this. If you're the Cubs and you could say, if we get this guy and we make the playoffs, he's starting a playoff game for us for sure. That's what you needed. I don't think Michael Soroka was that. I think he was a fine depth option, especially if he was able to stay healthy. But with the velocity dip and I think just maybe the pedigree, he just didn't. It felt like you were adding a depth starter versus a bona fide playoff starter. And now he's hurt. So you already lost that depth, and that was the only starting pitcher that you added when it kind of felt like you needed that playoff caliber bona fide guy to add at the trade deadline. And, I understand. I think everyone understands that the prices for controllable starters was high. I mean, I don't think any controllable starter actually changed teams at the trade deadline. And, some rental piece prices were high as well, for sure. But again, it's just Soroka didn't feel like enough at the time. And certainly now with the injury, doesn't feel like the Cubs did enough in that department now. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if Michael Soroka will pitch for the Cubs again this season. We'll see what happens as the Cubs continue to try and get healthier in that rotation. But It's obviously a disappointing thing for the Cubs, considering this was one of your big trade deadline acquisitions as you tried to upgrade the roster and get to the playoffs. And that's a hit to that, of course. We'll see if the rest of the rotation options can step up in his absence. But kind of goes back to, even at the time, it didn't feel like Michael Soroka was enough, but definitely doesn't feel like enough now. So that'll almost do it for this episode. Just want to give you a quick rundown on what's coming up next for the Cubs. They've got 3 in St. Louis starting Friday. Then they have Monday's off day before they head to Toronto for another 3-game set. Which, I look at that Toronto series, and the Blue Jays have also been really hot. They own the best record in the American League and the second best record in Major League Baseball at 68-48. So a couple of games ahead of the Cubs as far as best records in the majors go. But so that will be a tough series. That'll be a tough series for the Cubs, and to kind of show that they can go out and compete with those high-end playoff caliber teams. The Blue Jays have been on a roll for a while now. They've overtaken the Yankees and the rest of that division to take first place, and now they're sitting with the best record in the American League. So we'll see what the Cubs can do when they get there. But first, of course, as I mentioned, they got to get through St. Louis, which is never an easy series. It's never an easy series to play your historic chief rival in the St. Louis Cardinals. Cardinals have obviously, like, there was a point there, of course, during the season where they were up there with the Cubs and the Brewers as far as competing for the division. They've fallen far back now. They're at 500 as we speak today, 13 games back in the division. So maybe less so of a threat than they were the last time the Cubs visited St. Louis. But to run down the probables for that series, Friday, the Cubs will throw Matthew Boyd against Michael McGreevy. Saturday is Colin Ray against Andre Palante. Yeah, Andre Palante. So Colin Ray versus Andre Palante on Saturday. And then Sunday is Shota Imanaga against Sonny Gray, which should be a fun pitching matchup there. So that's what the Cubs have coming up next. Again, they do have 48 more games to right the ship and take it to the Brewers and run them down and potentially, win that division and get a top 2 seed into the playoffs. There's a lot of baseball left to play. So if I'm a Cubs fan, I would say Cubs fans shouldn't start panicking right now. I know that's not going to stop the panickers from doing that, but there is still a lot of baseball left to play. And as we saw with the Cubs in 2023, right, in September, even the teams that are hot can all of a sudden fall back to earth, and other teams can jump them in the standings. So don't give up hope yet, but it's going to be a tough road. It's a long way to go still for the Cubs, and they just, as I said earlier, have to take care of business and take care of the teams that are in front of them. But that'll do it for this week's Addison to 35th podcast Cubs episode. Again, I'm your host, Ryan Herrera. I want to thank everyone for the support you've already given us. I would appreciate, and my guy Herb Lawrence would certainly appreciate, any more support you can give us. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your neighbors. A couple big series coming up for the Cubs, and certainly in a couple weeks when the Brewers are in town, another big series there. But until the Cubs get there, and as we continue to watch the Cubs, see if they can make a big playoff run here down the stretch, until we get through all of that, I will talk to you guys later. Have a good one.